Good morning. Good morning. Ákos Öster here, lately of Wesleyan, and welcome to Rachel Dwyer, here at the home of the father of separation of church and state, Roger Williams. So Rachel is a prolific writer, and I particularly like the range of her very first intervention, as we say these days, almost 20 years ago, with a double work, one in writing of devotional literature, and at the same time a book on film. And this just went on till today, and what we look forward to is not just what you say, but the style and the verve and the wit with which you deliver it.
Thank you. Thank you. It's always very hard coming on after Faisal because, you know, that intensity, and I shall now totally dissipate the seriousness and profundity of his thought this morning by lowering the tone substantially. And you might guess from my title here that, you know, things take time in Hindi cinema. A Hindi film is about 3 hours long, so I'll try and keep it to 45 minutes, but, you know, I hope we'll get a bit more than beyond the interval in that time. Now, I'm actually trying to look at the way in which Indian cinema depicts the sacred. I'm looking mostly at Hindi cinema, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, the commercial mainstream cinema made in Bombay, Mumbai. But just the idea of the sacred in Indian cinema being nothing new, it goes back, as you know, right to the beginning. The first Indian film, debatable, but probably the first Indian film. And this creation of the idea of genres in Indian cinema, which can be loosely described as religious. So we have films which are called mythologicals, which show gods and goddesses appearing themselves in the films. We have devotional films about particular devotees of these gods and goddesses. And we also have what are loosely called Islamicate genres, films which show the Islamic cultural life of the subcontinent and ideas of devotion. And these are evoked through languages, narratives, texts, music and behavior. Even just a name can evoke the sacred. If you've got a character called Ram, you can pretty much guess there's going to be some reason behind that. And so one of the things that underlines what I'm talking about today is this way in which the cinema has evolved a whole language and codes of dealing with the sacred, while certain stars themselves and other cinematic elements may indeed embody values that can be associated with the religious. And so here I'm going to skip in a way that I wouldn't let a student get away with over the idea of what constitutes the sacred here, but just to remind everybody of this conflation of Indian with Hindu, of religion and culture, and this whole problematic context of what we might call the Hindu here. And what interests me is the way in which films come to terms with the sacred, not as a religion of learning and of knowledge, but of something which is appropriate to the form of the film, to the melodrama, the visual, the listening, the oral, and the sensory, ways in which films can engage with the idea of sacredness, but within the form of the melodrama and the emotional excess that it can bring to understanding religion. So in early films, we see miracles taking place overtly and indirectly. And one of the things I'm interested in is, has anything changed over the years? And I'm not going to go into the history of cinema. I've written a lot about religion and cinema elsewhere. But just the idea, perhaps, that we could look at the shift. This is the 70th year of Indian independence. And the idea in which religious films and nationalism were linked in the earlier days. And in the 1950s, this new state which had to deal with the past and move on. And I'm just going to mention one older film before moving on to the present. This film, Mother India, whose title suggests it's claimed to be a national epic, which seems to evoke religion in its view of sacred geography, but also about ideas of modernity in India and the non-modern and the modern learning to live and exist side by side in a country which itself is sacred, not something necessarily which belongs to Hindu nationalism, but part of a longer history. And I'm just going to give you the opening sequences of this film. Unfortunately, it doesn't have subtitles, but it seems like a devotional, perhaps we could call it a hymn. I'm not sure how much I can take for granted Indian languages and so on here, so if it's all a bit tedious, please do excuse me. And this idea that it's about Mother Earth, and the song saying, Mother Earth, we sing your praises. So I think just in that very short clip, giving you this idea of worshipping the earth, the sacredness of the earth, the words that are used about the earth, and also indeed, this obviously clearly Soviet-style exposition, the boy, girl and a tractor type film here. But if we see the 1950s, at the point at which this film was made, as Nehruvian, then do we see the present in Indian cinema as Hindu nationalist? And that's one of the things I want to be talking about, how these ideas of the sacred are shaped in contemporary India there. Because if we're trying to connect cinema to the wider context of culture in India, perhaps we're overdoing it. If we just want to focus on the government and say, oh, well, the first NDA government, 98 to 2004, brought a new era of Hindu nationalism into public culture, and since 2014 things have changed. That's obviously too simplistic, but we can certainly see since 2014 there are clear cultural work being undertaken to change ideas of culture. So cinema is very much part of this, and many of you will have seen there have been great controversies going on in the way the government has interacted with cinema since 2014. So is cinema one of these areas which is politicised? And of course, yes, but with an eye to censorship and the markets, as well as the sensibilities of the filmmakers, who are famously seen to be secular and from many different communities and backgrounds, and the kind of films they make. Identifying a film as Hindu nationalist would be complicated. What would it mean? Are there any films we could say would be Hindu nationalist? Perhaps we could look at a film, Hey Ram, from 2000, might be one which people might consider, telling the history of the partition and beyond to the assassination of Gandhi. Or do we just take films which show Hindu family values? What kind of films we'll be looking at in our sample? And I think we've seen far more written about television than we have about cinema at this point. Many important works on the role of television in the rise of Hindu nationalism, particularly the screening of the great epics of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, of course. But we could also look at the new diasporic films of the 1990s, the historical, the biopic, the middlebrow films, but many more complicated kind of films, and what ideas of religion are they showing here? So I want to look at a few recent films in a bit more detail which show clear signs of the sacred, and wonder if this is something new or are they linked to ideas of what is going on in Indian culture today. I've written a paper which came out recently with the Hartford Seminary about the idea of comedies which were linked loosely to religion. These were PK and Bajrangi Bhaijaan, which I'm going to say more about later. And I wrote about them there in the context of Hindus and Muslims in India, Pakistan. And I want to mention them again, but I want to begin with a film which was minor in comparison to their massive success. But its reception and the way it was received, I think, is quite significant. This is a film called OMG, Oh My God. And it's based on a Gujarati play, Kanji Virudh Kanji, itself adapted from an Australian movie, The Man Who Sued God. Kanji Lal Paresh Rawal, who is incidentally today a BJP MP, is a Gujarati whose shop sells religious images and antiques, although he is an atheist. After he bans his son from playing Dahi Handi, the Janmashtami celebrations, his shop is destroyed in a minor earthquake that curiously leaves all the surrounding buildings intact. His insurance claim is rejected because it's an act of God. So he takes God, or rather the God-men, to court. And this is really where it all goes on. This is a comedy, the idea of God in the world today. So we can have the kind of hip God, we can have the Dahi Handi celebration, the colourful images where we're presented God, but the idea of God being something modern and yet traditional. So taking a song but updating it. But when he takes God to court, the God-men then launch an attack on him, the people. He's insulting religious practice. So Kanji has to leave the court by the back door, but the mob finds him. I'm sure you're familiar with Vishnu, Krishna turning the chakra, the wheel on his hand. Krishna is a charioteer in the Mahabharata. So by this point, the audience has clearly realised this is an incarnation of Krishna appeared suddenly in the middle of this realistic film. And so everybody seems to be aware of it, apart from Kanji Bai himself, because of course he's an atheist. He can't even believe this man who's a stunt driver might be God. And Krishna comes to live in his house, persuades him to read the Gita, the Bible, the Quran, and then Kanji has a stroke. The court case is won, he wins the argument against them, but the crowd thinks he is dead and want to attend his funeral. They think he's a god and they've built a statue to him himself. But Kanji Bai is in hospital here with his stroke. I'm sure you will recognise this as a well-known religious song. Hare Ram, Hare Krishna.
तुम आईसीयू, तुम्हारे बीवी बच्चे भारी हैं, किसी को अलाउड नहीं आता। तुम्हें जगाने आया, तुम्हारा वक्त हो गया जागने का। दिल से गालियां दी है ना भगवान को, और दिल कहाँ होता है? लेफ्ट साइड। इसलिए भगवान ने पूरा का पूरा लेफ्ट साइड पैरालाइज कर दिया। ऐसा मैं नहीं कह रहा हूँ, बाहर जितने भी मीडिया वाले हैं ना, अफवाह फैलाई जा रही है इस बात की। चाहो तो मैं तुम्हें ठीक कर सकता हूँ।
डॉक्टर भी
मैं ऑल इन वन हूँ, कहो तो एक चमत्कार दिखाओ।
बागेपुरा को चमत्कार नहीं।
अच्छा चलो भाई। Krishna Vasudev Yadav from Gokul. अब तो विश्वास हो गया। अरे मैं उसी रूप में आया हूँ जो आप लोग हमेशा देखते हो टीवी पे, कैलेंडर पे, फिल्मों में। बरसों से यही रूप मेरा चलता आ रहा है, उसी रूप में आपके सामने खड़ा हूं। लेकिन काजी भाई, मैं ऐसा हूं। जैसे एक भक्त भगवान के बिना अधूरा होता है, वैसे ही भगवान भी एक सच्चे भक्त के बिना अधूरा होता है।
So in this film, this comedy, we have all the tropes that come from the religious films. We have this friendship between the two, the similarity between the Krishna and Arjuna of the Gita, except here he's not convincing Arjuna to fight his relatives, he's convincing him to believe in him. He displays his full Vishvarupa form as the full incarnation of Krishna, and this idea of the friend. God is our friend, he doesn't want symbolic worship, he wants our love. And this is very much this kind of ethos which we get here in the film. Krishna and Kanji Bai have this humorous relationship between them. Krishna tolerates his friend's endless one-liner humour, distantly but emotional moments in which spectacle music bind them together here. And this is very much the traditional cinematic way, except this time rather than Kanji Bai having the one-liner, Krishna himself deflates him. I'm just a piece of calendar art in all this costume because I'm really God among you anyway. So deflating it like that. And I think the film was a great success, and it was remarkably uncontroversial because it eventually promotes the idea of God being real, being here. It's a film ultimately about believers, but criticising these God-men. And many of you will be aware that this week we've seen in India a number of God-men said to be complete frauds, as well as one going to jail for many years because of his, and riots breaking out across the state in which he was arrested. And PK, one of India's most successful films of all time, PK meaning tipsy, somebody who's drunk and come here, is a very different kind of film which attracted much wider controversy, which I've documented in the paper that I wrote earlier. This is a big star. This is Amir Khan, a Muslim, a well-known political activist within India, a star beyond cinema, somebody who appears on television to use his star power for social change as well. And this film has been very controversial, and all sorts of attacks, attempts to ban it and so on have gone on, even though it's a film about an alien. Is really the key theme, but it's framed in a love story, an Indo-Pak love story. What are the possibilities of romance between India and Pakistan, Indians and Pakistanis, and how they have to meet in Europe, outside Pakistan, tied together by a love of literature. and how they eventually are brought together here. This idea of Hindi-Urdu poetry being something which links a whole nation, and in a moment of crisis, the Pakistani embassy in Brussels acts as a dating agency, forwarding numbers, putting India and Pakistan together to show that really love is the big religion of all, and this is what the alien comes to the world to show here. And because it's played by Amir Khan, he has this particularly way of evoking this. He comes and he realizes that everybody's going the wrong way about God. These media godmen who are promoting their idea of religion while benefiting themselves are really just seeking themselves. And here he has this idea that religion all looks wrong to an outsider.
अरे इसके रॉन्ग नंबर से पगड़ी दी तो फिर की ले ली बस
फिर की
पीछे मैं मजाक कर रही हूँ
हम समझ गए, पूरा दिन समझ गया हम। कौन फिरकी ले रहा है? तपस्वी जी, भगवान को जो टेलीफोन लगाता है, ऐसा मुंडी ऊपर करके प्रभु पद प्रदर्शित करे, वो सब काल रंग नंबर पर जा रहा है। और वहां कौन बैठा है जो उनका फिरकी ले रहा है? ये तो भगवान हमारे मोटवा को अपना डमरू का टूटा हुआ मन का कैसे बोल सकता है? उनका लागत है भगवान से बात करे का कम्युनिकेशन सिस्टम ही गोला का टोटल लुल हो चुका है। सब मैनेजर का काल रंग नंबर पर जा रहा है।
मतलब
हम हमेशा सोचता था भगवान हमारे प्रॉब्लम का ये उल्टा सीधा सलूशन काहे देता है। कब वो बोलता है कि बुलटिया मारते हुए हमारे घर आओ तो हर काम करूंगा। अब बताओ, हम सब भगवान का बच्चा है, तो कौन नॉर्मल बाप अपना बच्चा को बोलेगा कि बुलटिया मार तो हर काम करूंगा। तो हम पापा कभी बोला था कि बिटिया नया ड्रेस चाहिए तो चल बुलटिया मार है? कब वो बोलता है कि हमका गैया के दूध से नहलाओ डेली, काल आ जाएगा ये।
ठीक है, अगर ये कॉल्स राइट नंबर पर असली भगवान के पास जाते हैं तो वो क्या बोलते हैं?
कहा बोलते? अरे बोलते कि हमारा करोड़ों बच्चा भूखा सोता है फुटपाथ पे डेली, भूखा ही दूध पिलाओ, हमका क्या खाओ दे रहे हो दूध से? कौन फिर के ले रहा है जैसे अभी तुम लिया था।
पीके सोच रहा था तपस्वी बहुत शरीफ आदमी है, मैंने उसका ये कंफ्यूजन नहीं।
And this idea of this being this way of attacking again the way that humans are dealing with God, not God himself, not God as a force here, was what again got the film into all these problems again, from these godmen, from religious men, taken up by films like, if you don't read Dr. Subramanian Swami's tweets, you're really missing out on a treat here, talking about how Amir Khan is obviously, going to face indictment from Lord Shiva for making this kind of film, and all the links here, although the film was promoted by a number of people within the film industry and a number of godmen, including Sri Ravi Shankar, who lends them his Art of Living premises for making the films there. No religion is favoured over another. There's an equal balance meant to be given between Hinduism and Islam, although more time is given within the film to dealing with the godmen here. I'm just keeping an eye on my watch here because I know these clips tend to take me way over time and want to keep it. The main enemy, though, is a Hindu, and that's what many of the critics have focused on here. Is this what the film, it becomes more about this and the idea of the Indo-Pakistan story. But why this attack on godmen? And I think this idea of venal and corrupt godmen has become really quite central to many of these films. And I mentioned last week the Akhil Bharatiya Akhara Parishad, or the ABAP, a group traced back to the 8th century to Adi Shankaracharya, has declared a list of fake Babas, including Ram Rahim, whose conviction for rape led to the death of 42 people. Others including Radhe Ma, a really extraordinary godwoman in lipstick and so on, and others. And these godmen are often linked to political groups because politicians seek to benefit from their votes of followers, and many of them have great personal wealth. I'm thinking here of people like Guru Ramdev with his extraordinary Patanjali marketing, which seems to be some miracle from God himself. And these links between the media, God, men, religion, all very much emphasised here. Not really film, but on the idea of them being Juggu in that PK film is a news reporter who's fed up with doing stories about depressed dogs, and so finds this idea of doing a story about an alien far more exciting. It's not an attack on religion itself, but it's on this idea of fakery. This idea of these comedy villains, baddies, godmen presented in the movies, but clearing this idea of religion itself being valorized, being seen as sacred, reverence for each other, which is key to it. And why these are comedies, I think, is something we want to keep in mind. What are these genres? These are not religious films. They're about religion, but they're not religious genres, perhaps. And we see this film, which I think we were all attracted to initially by its extraordinary name, Bajrangi Bhaijaan. What does the name mean? Bajrangi, a follower of Lord Hanuman, or associated with the Bajrang Dal, an extremist group of have been people seeking to have them outlawed because of their violent mob behaviour here. The story is about a small girl who becomes lost in India, a Pakistani girl who's come seeking a miracle because India's sacred spaces remain Pakistani sacred spaces, and she gets lost when she crosses the border into India, and her first real vision of India is of a perhaps religious event, I don't know. I just want to show you a quick clip. This is in Kurukshetra, the site at which the Bhagavad Gita was revealed, and she comes across a celebration of Hanuman. So this idea, are you taking a selfie of the star? Are you taking a selfie of Hanuman? What are you taking a selfie of? Why this image, capturing this image of God, these dance forms, this group, clearly meant to be based on the Bajrang Dal, a terrifying group, presented here as a humorous bunch. And this little Pakistani girl who's never seen anything like this in her life, just taking to the hero because Salman Khan's charisma, this great hero of the Hindi film industry, just attaching herself there. And this idea that this religion is sort of on display, open, it's a music, it's a spectacle, it's a dance here. And what marks these differences between these communities, this Brahminical Hindutva man, how can he cope with this idea of this little girl here? And how does he deal with finding out her true identity? Because she's mute. She's too young to read and write, and she can't speak. So nobody knows who she is. How do they find her identity? What are the things that make the differences between Hindus and Muslims in the community here? So So this Hindutva nationalists are surrounded in Old Delhi with these very clear monumental signs of Delhi's Islamic past.
भैया जी, पता नहीं भैया जी घर पे नहीं मिल रही है। मिल नहीं रही है? अभी तो हम साथ ही खाना खा रहे थे, फिर अचानक गायब हो गई। समझ में नहीं आ रहा है कहाँ चली गई।
ताई जी, मुन्नी छत पे भी नहीं है।
हे भगवान।
मुन्नी, 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 मुन्नी,
मुन्नी, मुन्नी, पावर, पावर।
So the first sign being she's a non-vegetarian, as marking the differences between Hindu and Muslim. And I just want to also mention that this little girl has become a star but wasn't here, but these two stars, Salman Khan, who is known to engage in Hindu, with a Muslim name, but engages in many Hindu worships and so on in Bombay, and Kareena Kapoor, who's married to a Muslim, is part Hindu, part Christian herself. So again, these ideas of what really make religious difference focused also on the stars. So again, this idea of comedy being associated with difference, I'm not going to have time to show you the other ways they find out who she is. One is worship. He takes her to apologise to God for eating meat, and then she goes to the dargah opposite where she clearly knows how to pray. And the real giveaway is when they're watching a cricket match and she starts cheering for Pakistan instead of for India, and then her fate is sealed. She has to be returned to Pakistan. There's no question of keeping her in India, however complicated this becomes. And this idea when they cross, I'm going to skip these scenes much as I'd love to show them, and this Bajrangi, this Hindutva extremist, has to go to Pakistan to return her, and just gets across the border by saying he follows Hanuman and everything he does is right, and everybody just believes him and lets him over. He meets they stay in a mosque overnight, and with of course the usual comedy trope of two men dressing up in burqas.
यहाँ आगे खेतों से होकर धन्यवाद रखने का है। धन्यवाद। आप बहुत नेक काम कर रहे हैं। मैं अल्लाह से दुआ करूंगा कि आपको इस बच्चे की हिफाजत मिल जाए।
And Bajrangi, who's never been able to accept any Islamic belief or practice at this point, almost responds with a mirror gesture here, but teaches the Pakistanis instead to say Jai Shri Ram. And this, of course, was cut from the film when it was shown in Pakistan, although the film itself was an absolutely colossal hit on that side of the border too, because it's a film about love conquers everything. Whatever you are, it doesn't matter. Love is what transforms this failed Brahmin into being a hero as he braves taking this girl back to Pakistan and to restore her to the family. And of course, the Pakistanis find Bajrangi hilarious, keep thinking he's worshipping animals, don't understand he's vegetarian, and so on. And the differences seeming to be largely to do with passports, money, and so on. The differences between the countries are largely shown as humorous. But the different element is perhaps in the way that religion itself is shown, because perhaps we do have a miracle. Although Muni was lost because she came to India for her devotional practices, her restoration seems to take place under miracles, but not shown quite as miracles. And here we just enter, we have to have, because it's about Pakistan, we have to have, of course, a qawwali and a devotional performance within the film. So they're travelling across Pakistan. He meets a journalist, And they travel across Pakistan looking for the family. Muni pointed to a picture of Switzerland and said, this looks like home, so they know it's Kashmir. And they start taking her back. And when this Qawwali, this devotional Sufi song, is being performed, the miracles begin to take place. You see him walking around. He becomes a pilgrim in his black blanket, carrying this little girl back home across the border. And Bajrang, who would never go into a mosque before, now transformed by love. And again, this role of the media in mediating between people, between religion and religious groups.
मैं चांदमा बोल रहा हूँ और आज मैं आपको एक ऐसे आदमी के बारे में बताने जा रहा हूँ जो हमारे मुल्क में बिना वीज़ा के रात के अंधेरे में बॉर्डर के तारों के नीचे से घुस आया और जिसका नाम है बजरंगी।
This is Muni's mother. But Muni's fallen asleep, so can't see her mother. And look, extraordinary for Bajrangi.
बजरंगी पर जब सारे दरवाजे बंद हो गए तो इस बच्ची को उसके माँ बाप से मिलवाने के लिए उसके पास सिर्फ यही रास्ता बचा था।
And the restoration takes place because of the film. They see on television her mother in the background. They see her, they see where the bus is going and follow the bus. And this is one of the films. I mean, Salman Khan has to take his shirt off, but he only does it in this film when he's being tortured by the Pakistanis and making it a very different sort of feel to the film. But is this a miracle? The miracle isn't like in Amar Akbar Antony. It doesn't take place during the Sufi song, but it's going on in the background between the Sufi song because he takes her home and restores her with her parents. Then we have this very Gandhian imagery of him walking to the glacier, followed by crowds of people as he goes across. And she says her first word, Mama. Not mother, but uncle, of course, for him. And he throws her in the air and the film ends. There's no idea that India and Pakistan have to be separated, but love and this devotion can tie them together across the border. It's also an absolutely hilarious film, and I would say when I was sort of thinking Hindi films are really losing their way, this is a film which I think really restored my faith, because you couldn't do it not in a Hindi film. The comedy, the images of devotion, the music, the emotionalism. I mean, it's completely illogical. This man just blusters his way across the Indo-Pak border. You know, it's crazy, but emotionally you believe everything that you see in this film about difference and being together. And her first word after Mama is Jai Shri Ram. So even though she's back in Pakistan, there's some idea of this Indian holiness back there. And the film, surprisingly, wasn't banned, had very little problems, and Salman Khan himself playing a sort of Hanuman. I mean, in real life, is Salman Khan Hanuman? We can almost believe it. It's something extraordinary there. He doesn't hate, but he doesn't understand what he doesn't know. And this is what really transforms him here. This subversive power of comedy to keep the core set of values upheld, mock those it wants to dismiss. And all three characters, all these three films so far, have a character who doesn't really know what's going on, but we, the audience, do. There's no mystery for us to discover. Hindi films aren't about showing us something new. It's about a way of unwinding a story we already know. So the humour lies within that. The heroes are non-heroic, rather ridiculous figures, often lost in society, society, but who question society from the outside in and become heroic by establishing a new set of values within what we could perhaps call roughly religious. We can laugh at the silly things people believe, and yet if we engage, we're carried away with the emotional surge. Like that moment I showed you of Krishna appearing, you watch it in a film and it's okay, but you're watching it in a movie hall when you've been waiting for this moment all along, you know who's who, and it suddenly comes along here. Kanji Bai is sharp-witted, he's Gujarati, but the comedy of the others comes from questioning the world about them, undercutting accepted wisdom, formal conventions, whereas in Bajrangi Bhaijaan, the comic simplicity of this man who sounds possibly villainous, because we also might think of Bajrangi Babu, who was convicted for after the 2002 riots in Gujarat, becomes heroic, going through these crazy situations by being pure at heart, and how important that is for it. But in a way, in the film Bajrangi Bhaijaan, although we see the Hindu devotional practices, perhaps it is the Islamicate that works here. These films can raise issues and topics that might be elsewhere seen as shocking, subversive, or perhaps even boring or simplistic. But these emotional, melodramatic moments smooth them over. We laugh, we cry, we feel good. Love is the greatest value of all. Kanji Bai loves his friend Krishna. PK falls in love, but in his quest for truth goes home to his planet. Bajrangi Bhaijaan loves the little girl, but has to follow his principles. And yet, when we see the films, we're in no doubt that there is some religious context within them, as miracles do indeed happen in all of them. Even in PK, it's when he's chasing somebody who's incarnated, who's dressed up as Shiva, that his miracle happens. He finds his transmitter. And these Hindu-Muslim romances and stories, which are set in the context of these films, I think are significant. But I just want to move on. These are things, which I'm covering very quickly. But perhaps we could also look at one of the very important parts of the Hindutva cultural agenda today, which is reconsidering history. I'm sure many of you have already heard that Maharana Pratap didn't lose at Haldigati. That's been changed in history, and the Mughals just came to loot India and not give anything to it. So these changes have been going on around them. And so it's not surprising that then the historical genre has become one of the ways in which these things are seen. And there's a film called Bajirao Mastani about the love story between the Brahmin Peshwa, Bajirao, and the Muslim princess Mastani. Shows us a martial Hindu culture of epic splendor, during which time the Brahmin Bajirao, and I just want to underline these Brahminical elements in these films, leads his forces to war with a massive saffron flag over the map of India, calling it the Hind Mahasamrat, the great empire of India, talking of Hindu Swaraj, while he's fighting Muslims on two fronts in Bundelkhand and in Hyderabad. If it's a critique, it's about love above community, but the glamour of the Brahminical court and the battle with the Nizam of Hyderabad here. Maharashtra, of course, being the homeland of Brahminical Hindutva and of the RSS. And I'm just going to show you very briefly these two clips here, going over, just showing you the idea of splendor. This is the return of Bajirao from his campaign. And this idea of the splendid martial history of Hindu India. And I just want to just show you the beginning of another one during a scene where the two wives, the Hindu first wife, is celebrating the festival of Ganpati while there is a plan to kill the Muslim wife going on at the second time. And I just read a paper by Ajay Gehlawat who sees this film as a critique of current Hindutva policy, and I tend to read the film the opposite way. But we can... this idea of this epic past. And I just want to end then by saying that in the last few years, a new kind of film has come into Hindi cinema, though the film isn't originally made in Hindi. It's been a huge success, dubbed into Hindi. The kind of sci-fi genres, fantasy films, which can be linked to films in the West from Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones and so on, but meshing in with this Indian popular genre of fantasy novels set in a historical or mythical past. Those of Amish, which sell in the millions, really literally in the millions, these very popular films. And these are important, I think, because they politicise and historicise issues which can't be set in the present. You can create this hyper-masculinised form of history and have a hyper-historical realism, what things could have looked like in the past, in this glorious past, but probably didn't, and bring together these genres and forms of historical fiction, religion, fantasy, and magic, a vision of India, past and future, of these Brahminical rulers, of grandeur and splendour, noticed in all these papers. And I just want to make a few concluding remarks as I go. I'll just run the clip from Bahubali, which isn't an overtly religious film, but perhaps I'm just obsessing. You might see something religious in this. His adopted mother, this is a prince in exile, is tired of carrying water to worship the great lingam. So being a devoted son, he's going to take the lingam to a waterfall where it can be permanently cooled. So what's going on in these films, I think, that's significant is there's a shifting of religiosity onto young, muscular men from the female figure. Religiosity in Indian films was traditionally associated with women, but now it's shifting to a male virility. Perhaps a shift from Gandhi's understanding of the feminine, which we saw in many of the earlier Indian films, linked to this idea of the male gods becoming more masculine that was famously noticed during the rise of the building of the temple in Ayodhya. The hypermasculinity of the Indian male stars, who you've seen here, I don't think you can get much more masculine than this, and linking the sacred and the masculine, something we've seen under the RSS and the BJP, perhaps forming what we could call a hysterical masculinity here, of almost a celibacy, sexually attractive but restrained and devoted in their dealings with women. But in Bajrangi Bhaijaan, the masculinity fails. He's born to be a wrestler, but he can't be because he's ticklish. So he's not heroic except in a feminine way as he becomes this Gandhian pilgrim, crossing the border, preaching love as he goes. So these religious films don't celebrate gods and goddesses, but they criticize godmen for a more rational, modern, intellectual form of Hinduism. No difficult or unruly deities here, but the gods are bourgeoisified. Is that a word? I'm not sure. Krishna, Ram, Hanuman, Shiva, Ganesh all become like a sort of family here. The mother sacred, the father sacred, and Vande Mataram, worshipping Mother India throughout. Devotion shifting onto the star, perhaps, as well as from the film here. This idea of the sacred notion of India from the Nehruvian vision I showed you at the beginning of Mother India to this focus on the western border. Bajrangi and PK, we have dealing with crossing this border, an idea of different history. The Brahminical court of the Peshwa, and here we have the muscular past of Mahishmati, this mythical city. The idea of organised religion is shown very much in these historicals, the state religion of the Peshwas, the RSS groups of Bajrangi, temples, public spaces over the domestic. So I think in these films we can say the sacred remains a key part of Indian cinema, where these new forms generate little reaction from critics and censors, perhaps because they seem normalised already before these values appear on the screen. Thank you.
There's a lot to discuss here, Rachel, and especially the three areas. Is this all? Yeah. Three broad areas, but anything else that comes up, this broad connection of religion to culture is one that's very, very telling in these films. And then secondly, film form and style, kind of close analysis of editing and camera work and so forth. and finally the connection between film and society. And I particularly like in an earlier version of this paper a long sentence that succeeds in linking, I made a note of it, that links the actor, the name, the proper names to the role, to reference points outside of the film through the production, which is part of the larger society, and the connections with historical sites, politics, all in one sentence, which shows that a close reading of the film doesn't have to be entirely interior, but can locate the connection between film and society and suggest a way of a kind of a potential or envisioning a possibility for Hindus and Muslims to share a space. So with that, let us...
Of course, I never tire listening to you, nor reading your text, which I use in classes. But a nagging question that always comes to my mind when is not simply the absence of a film in the last, I would say, 20, 30 years. I haven't seen a film yet other than Garam Hawa, I think, that deals with just the everyday, the Indian Muslim in the daily lives, and present them other than all the adjectives that they could be X, Y, and Z, just normal life of Muslims in India. So that hasn't happened yet, I've been watching for such a films. But at the same time, he's a society that doesn't seem to criticize successful and very popular films like Salman Khan playing a Muslim person playing the role that he did in the clip we just saw, or Nargis playing Mother India, or you can just mention all these, Amir Khan playing all the roles, or Shah Rukh Khan playing roles that are not necessarily Muslim focused, but they are actually Hindu focused, and they portray a very decent, proper image of the role that they sort of take on. So why isn't there a critique of that? Whereas for fear of criticism, we don't have the second part of my question, which is, a good film about good Muslims. Where's the hypocrisy here?
I think there are perhaps those kinds of films, but not within the mainstream cinema. I think, and even Garam Hawa, of course, would be in the middle cinema, where these characters would tend to be located rather than in the mainstream. And we have indeed seen other kinds of Muslim genres evolve, well, not Muslim, but films featuring Muslims evolving in recent years. I mean, there was a spate of terrorist films. I mean, My Name is Khan, Qurban, and so on, but set in New York, because you couldn't show it in India, partly because, of course, you'd be exciting these problems. But there have been some films which I think have shown problems, films which I was quite surprised were made. Kai Poche, set in Gujarat in the 2002 riots, was quite surprising, although the main characters weren't Muslims, showing that. And maybe this year, Shah Rukh Khan has started playing Muslim characters. He plays a sort of fairly, well, if you can call the Indian hockey coach a normal Muslim otherwise in Chak De, India, but also in Rais, where he plays this Muslim bootlegger, is a more, again, it's problematic, but trying to hit something perhaps a bit more normal. But I think it's also important, I mentioned it in passing, the venom with which these stars have been attacked by the media. Sometimes, Salman Khan's behaviour can hardly be said to be exemplary, but I think a lot of the attacks that are led on him are to do with his background as well. Yes, the dangerous driving case, the killing of endangered species. I mean, that's not a victimisation. Amir Khan has come under a great deal of attack. He was removed from his job as ambassador for Indian tourism because of him saying that my wife has said, is this country safe for our children these days? Shah Rukh Khan comes under attack for also saying anything which is seen as being remotely controversial. I mean, they may be stars, they may be very rich and very powerful, but they're still Muslims. In whatever way, even though all of them happen to be married or have relations who are Hindu, I mean, they're not seen as any sort of fundamentalist type. So the attacks on Amir Khan after PK certainly were about he's got links to terrorism and so on, which went beyond being far-fetched. And Ranveer, who I didn't really show you much in Baji Rao, and Prabhas Singh, but in Bahubali, are celebrated as being Hindu stars. So I mean, no, this is an ongoing problem, and in a way perhaps you can't have a film, not just because of censorship, but because it doesn't show the current imagination of how Muslims are seen in India, that there still has to be, good Muslims are performative Muslims. They're people that enact being Muslim all the time. You can't just be somebody who happens to be Muslim. I mean, in Dhoom, there was a character called Ali who was normal. I mean, played by Uday Chopra, but, a relatively normal character. But you don't see these people, and I don't think you will. I think that will remain something that you see much more in middle cinema, realistic cinema, because of the ways in which you have the good Muslim, but you're not going to have a film about the Muslim society.
So, I had a comment about your take on Bajrangi Bhaijaan. So I know that you said that the word Bajrangi is related to the Bajrang Dal in some ways. However, given the reception of the film in the country, and also, as a consumer of Bollywood cinema and as a scholar of that cinema, how I saw it is that, I didn't see it as an indictment of the Bajrangi Dal in any way. If anything, it was sort of a redemption, it was reconstructing the image of what a Bajrangi is really capable of. Salman Khan's faith and devotion in the movie, as the movie progresses, is the one that that helps him get the job done, that helps him return Munni to Pakistan. And of course, that faith is strongly related to, love, and that is very much, it is shown consistently, is part of his faith. So in that sense, even though, Salman Khan being a Muslim, so in many ways I saw that film pretty much within the nationalistic ideology. Another trend I wanted to point out is that more and more, as you would see with these films, within the Indian national context, it's always invariably a Hindu context. Muslim or Islamic beliefs are being pushed across the border. So in movies such as Happy Bhag Jayegi, and even this one, where do you find, the Muslim folks or Muslim love? It's not within India, because India is being constructed as this Hindu, overwhelmingly Hindu majority nation. And of course, even though it is emphasized, the secularism, comes, is being pushed to the border. It's not within the country anymore. It's outside of, and the image that you see of India is primarily Hindu, which is very much in line with Moditwa, with whatever is going on in India at this time.
Can we start with this? There is quite a package.
You want to take 2, 3, and then...
Yeah, we'll take a couple more, Brian and Bhavani and Wasida, so 3, and if you can keep it short, that would be great.
So my question, I think, actually builds off the last question. And I know you didn't have enough time to get to the last sort of genre that you were working with, which were the sort of mythological, science fiction sort of texts. But I'm really interested in the film Bahubali, because I think of all the films you've shown, it's the only one in which Muslims are pretty much completely absent. Now, there's one way to read, that's what I'm getting to. There's one moment in which you meet a Muslim, and it's in the scene, I think, where you're introduced to Kattappa, right? And there's the Muslim traders that come to sell him swords.
Afghans.
Yes, they're Afghans. And so I wonder if, my question would be, what is this genre that is the mythological sort of sci-fi genre, where are Muslims sort of figuring in that? Because to me, it reminds me almost of sort of African-American critiques of science fiction, right? Where Afrofuturism has emerged as a genre that says that, you know, black people, people of color are not imagined in these sort of technological or mythological futures. And it seems that Muslims similarly don't figure into this genre at all, and yet Hinduism seems to be in some ways the default. And I want to make one quick point to that, which is just simply, if you look in the text, Shiva is loosely mentioned in the very first film, but other than that, where else is God? It's just sort of assumed there's a certain general kind of Hinduness that's part Adivasi, part sort of Vedic, Brahminical, etc.
No, I think that's a very important point. And I mean, you didn't mention the depiction of the people he goes to war with, which is just like you're sitting in the movie all think, I cannot believe this. I mean, there are people with very dark skin who talk in languages with clicks and sound like South African languages, and you're just sitting there going, I want this to be over now. It's really horrific, and I wouldn't actually show the clips because they're not even so bad they're funny, they're just really shocking. Yeah, racist, and also because there are, as you say, the Adivasi links and who are these people. I mean, this seems to me to be the thing when we're talking about these. I mean, in a way that, I say that in these films they're Indo-Pak love stories because the Pakistani person, who might be a good person, the Muslim, is on the other side of the border. And I mean, I think it's fair enough to say nowadays that the idea of united, undivided India has largely been abandoned, that border is seen now to be permanent. And I think that's quite important there. But you can have a good Pakistani. You know, you can, that doesn't seem to be a problem. But this idea of, it's like Lord of the Rings is very sort of, what religion do we have there? And yet there's some feeling perhaps of, all these films have some sort of, perhaps if they're Western, have a Christian underlying theme to them, perhaps also Bahubali has this underlying Hindu theme, and creating this idea of this temple with the great the city, the way the city's laid out, evocative of how these could be. I mean, it's much less specific, obviously, than the Amish novels, where we have Shiv and Parvati, but they're kind of bourgeoisified, so Parvati, you have somebody driving her chariot and putting it in the parking lot and then going into the palace kind of things. These are very sort of not divine figures in a way, which is I think part of it. But yes, that was it, the one Muslim, which is interesting partly because it dates the film. But also, what is this past? Where is this place? Mahishmati immediately evokes Durga and this idea of the goddess being the presiding deity, and you have this lingam at the beginning marking him as the person who's blessed by his worship of Shiv. I mean, I just tend to think this is the thing, is to silence is much more something people probably aren't doing so consciously, but just, Muslims weren't there in the past. So you have these whole genres, historicals, which are about, the Mughals. I mean, never about Aurangzeb, but about the other Mughals. But the past is generally this mythological past. And is it religious or isn't it? With Bahubali, it's very hard to make out, despite those opening sequences.
Briefly respond to the previous question.
So I mentioned the Muslim being outside the border. I mean, Bajrangi, this is one of Kabir Khan's few films, which is, his other great Ekta Tiger is a Pakistani spy and an Indian spy having an affair outside Kabul Express, and so on. And then again, taking the personal history. I mean, Kabir's father is a professor of politics at Hyderabad University. He's not a typical filmy type. But it's also that it's that in this film, the Bajrangi, he's silly. He's like the Vidushika in Sanskrit literature. He's a failed Brahmin. He's meant to be a wrestler and he can't fight. He doesn't like the idea of her eating meat, but he takes her to a restaurant and sings a chicken song about, go ahead and eat chicken, it's all right. The Pakistan cricket team obviously is a bit of a problem. But again, it's this idea that he's not the right wing aren't necessarily evil people. The women seem very nice. You know, they're not out organising demonstrations or marches. They seem very nice, but they're pointless. They're pointless. I mean, can you imagine that scene I showed you, the selfie song? I mean, you know, that mob, and they're just happily sitting around clicking selfies. I mean, that would be terrifying mob. And yet, so in a way, it is sanitising them, but by way making them just look a bit silly, really. You know, they're comic figures. And then they end up being transformed by love and by contact with Islam in some way.
So briefly, guys, if you can.
Thanks a lot for a wonderful presentation. I think I watched this film, but after your analysis, I'm just realizing how much sacred I consume through my popular culture consumption. So thanks a lot for that. I was just thinking about the category about sacred and popular culture. I was just also thinking in terms of how do we read sacred in popular culture and popular culture in the sacred, as well as sacred and popular economy. And I'm just seeing in reference to particularly the Godman, which you mentioned, Ram Rahim, and because he has also made movies, and he has not also only made movies, but he's an actor. He does everything, production, direction. I don't know what all that thing is. So it's to me, it seems that it's a kind of new. I'm not sure if it's new, but it's a different phenomenon. And what kind of analysis does it necessitate for? I think to just see that how is sacred and popular are related. Because I think that would be the case where the popular culture, especially the contemporary or modern popular culture, film as a genre, is being introduced into sacred, and it does a kind of different kind of thing, which the sacred does in the case of popular culture. So in that case, I think watching a film. You consume religion while watching sacred in the popular culture. But when popular culture is introduced into the sacred, then you watch film as your religiosity. So I was just wondering about that phenomena, what happens to that? And also I think kind of popular economy, because I've heard that when the Baba's film come out, the Ram Rahim Singh Ji, and I think they're priced exorbitantly, I don't know how many times, and if the Baba sits in the audience with you, the price goes even further. So in the sense, I think it introduces a new popular economy, and that sacred does this thing. So, I mean, this is not,
Sorry,
related.
we have to
Yeah, all right.
stop, not to...
I think it's a very hard thing to say. I mean, the popular and the sacred, you know, go hand in hand for centuries. You know, in fact, for any religion to become successful, it has to become popular. So, you know, music, spectacle, art, all these forms take place. And I think, you know, perhaps some forms of religion have more spectacle associated with them than others. But it's the idea that isn't so much, I think, about sacred and the popular coming together, but what are the limits of the sacred? You know, are places which weren't seen as sacred becoming sacred? How do you stop, or why would you want to stop even? Perhaps one could ask, places becoming sacred. You know, when politicians die, do their memorials become sacred? You know, these become new boundaries which you're setting, and then who is excluded from coming into these? I mean, you know, you can think of demarcation of areas. I mean, you saw when the Vice President of India stepped down recently, came to the end of his service, Hamid Ansari. Modi said in Parliament, you know, you've always been with your people, your world, your kind of thing. So in a way saying that these worlds are separate. That was an extempore speech, it wasn't a planned speech. But these parts of because he said, well, maybe we need to think about Muslim communities in India. But in a way, bringing things into the popular domain is ways in which they can also be transformed. I mean, you know, it's famously like people might feel uncomfortable with reading Iqbal or Sunnism, but Sufism, well, Qawwali, you know, it's easy, we can all associate ourselves with that. We can all sing along a bhajan, that's all fine, and see a nice temple. But when do these areas start becoming different? I think that's the question, really, not how long it's been going on, but is there a shift?
Just one last question. Wasida? No? Okay, then Dharma calls, and next chapter in the afternoon is a big panel that we'll look forward to. Thank you very much.